Okay. Oh, cool. We got the chat going already. This is great. Okay. So I just wanted to thank you all and welcome you all to our event this evening. We're so excited to have this discussion. I know it's going to be very lively, and I feel I've learned something from these every time we do them. For context, I'm Krista Robley. I'm the enrollment manager at the Institute of Design. And just to kick things off, wanted to kind of briefly provide you with some background information on who the Institute of Design is, what this event is all about, kind of lead you into the discussion. And first and foremost, I wanted to thank our partners at UIC for joining us tonight. We've got a few folks from the product design school on our panel, and we really are, thankful that they decided to do this event with us. For those of you who are new to us, the Institute of Design, also called ID, so if you hear ID, that's what we're referring to. We're located in Chicago. We were founded as the new Bauhaus over 80 years ago now, and we were really known for pioneering human-centered design and systems thinking. And you'll hear a bit about kind of what we mean by that tonight and hear from some of our students. We are a graduate school, and like I said, you'll hear from students and faculty from our side tonight as well. And we are actually the only design school in the US completely dedicated to graduate level students. So we do not have, an undergraduate program. However, which I think you'll also hear about tonight, when we say institute, we are, larger than kind of just our graduate school as well. We really do measure our impact at kind of the societal level and believe that design can be used to, navigate complexity, direct creativity, and address kind of some meaty issues, which again, I think you'll hear from students, faculty, a little bit more about some of their work and learn kind of what we mean by that. But with that being said, that's exactly why we created this exploreID series of events. We wanted to showcase and have discussions with students, faculty, alum, partners in the Chicago area, partners certainly beyond that in the design field, to give prospective students and others some insight into, what your time at ID or in the design field as a whole or at design school as a whole might look like. And a big part of that is to showcase that, like I said before, is partnering with others in the design community to bring interesting discussions. And that's, like I mentioned earlier, why we decided to partner with UIC's industrial design program for tonight. And you'll hear from a few folks from that program as well, who we'll introduce here in a minute. On that note, kind of to set up tonight's discussion, we were inspired. ID studio professor Marty Thaler, who's on our panel, recently co-wrote a book with Jang, who is from UIC. He's the chair and professor over at the industrial design program there. And in their book, they lay out 101 things they learned in product design school, which kind of led us to think about the discussion tonight. And while you might hear a bit about the book, I'm sure that you will. You'll also hear from folks kind of from UIC and ID about their general experiences in design school, from pivotal moments they've had, kind of aha moments they've had during their time as a student, things they've learned, and how they've kind of applied that in the outside world, and I'm sure much, much, much more. So I guess that being said, I'm going to pass it over to McKinley. She's a Master of Design student, soon to be alumni at the Institute of Design. She will be moderating our discussion for tonight. So McKinley, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Krista. Hi, everyone. We are so thrilled to have you, all 129 of you and climbing. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday night, at least here in Chicago. As Krista said, my name is McKinley Sherrod, and I'm going to be tonight's moderator. I am in my last semester here, getting my Master of Design at ID, and I also did come in and completed the foundation program in my first year, so I was coming from a non-design background. So for introductions, we're going to allow everyone to introduce themselves, just their name and who they are. And then we're also going to ask our panelists to share a product that they feel strongly about. So I'll go first. A product that I really love and use frequently is my Le Creuset Dutch oven. that bright colored enamel stoneware pot. Can't beat it. So I'm going to pass the intros over to Marty.
Hi, everyone. How are you tonight? It's a rainy, stormy night in Chicago. Welcome, everybody. A lot of people here. Shout out to everybody there, including Matt, I assume is there somewhere, the other author. So anyway, I'm a professor at the Institute of Design. I've been teaching full-time since 2008. Prior to that, I was a consultant, still am a consultant, to many different companies. Sung and I work together to this day, consulting for companies. My favorite object, I brought one of them. I have many favorite objects. I brought this wonderful bottle opener. Yeah, we discussed this in advance, so that's why I have it here. It is the Diabolix. That's made by Leslie. It's Diabolix. It's a little happy devil. It's a very fun object if you want to open a bottle of Guinness, as I did when Matt told us that the book was published on Amazon. So I just want to pass it over to Spencer.
Hi, I'm Spencer Mel Green. I'm a fourth-year industrial design student at UIC. My favorite object, I would say, is the OXO potato peeler. For me, it was I was a kid and I was watching Objectified, the movie, and I saw the potato peeler and just in my head it clicked. I was like, yes, that's what I want to do. And then I went to design school and here I am. I'll go Sung, you're next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Hi, my name is Sung. I teach at UIC. I work with Marty in a consulting studio called Article. I am currently in my sabbatical, so I'm joining in from Seoul, Korea. It's fantastic weather here. They actually have about 2 months of fall. It's kind of unusual for Chicagoans. My favorite product is, which I have back here, hang on, which I actually brought overseas with me, is Fender Strat. It's a Fender Stratocaster. It's an electric guitar designed in late 40s, so about 70 years ago. It's a kind of a new category of instrument when it was designed, and what's amazing and the reason that I like this particular product is because as a new archetype, it was very quickly completed. It didn't allow for a lot of evolutionary kind of additions. So from the conception during the 50s or late 40s to this day, it's still the best of its kind in my mind. And there is no newer designs that came out that can actually beat the original. So it's one of the, I think that defines sort of what classic means for me. And yeah, lovely. Manuela, take it away.
Hi everyone, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Emanuela and I'm an alum from UIC's Industrial Design program, currently an MBA and MDes student at IIT or IIT. I'm sort of like a product of Sung and Marty, which is an interesting place to be in the first place. My favorite product is the Guzini trays. I know a lot of people may not know it here, but I'm from Nigeria. So when I was growing up with my family in Nigeria, my mom got these really beautiful Italian design trays. And I remember she would section it out for just like my dad and other guests, but like the kids weren't allowed to use it. That's okay. But yeah, it was sort of like one of the products that had me asking, so if my mom could get this from somewhere, who designed it? Or like, where did it come from? And so, yeah, that's it.
Thank you all for sharing that. It's always dangerous to ask a room of product designers what their favorite object is. I'm sure, could be here for quite some time on that question alone. But I do want to jump in and kind of get the conversation rolling here. And Spencer, I'm actually going to start with you because you picked out an OXO object to talk about a little bit in your introduction. And I'm just curious, what is it about that? And you mentioned it a little bit. What is it about that that kind of makes you like it or that had such an impact on you? And do you see any of the kind of governing principles of the design of that object as some of the principles that just make good design, period, whether it's product design or not?
Yeah, I think for me, it was in the movie, they show how the process, like the process and the idea behind why it was designed in such great detail, the story of his wife and arthritis needing a potato peeler, and then from there going to a bicycle grip just thrown on a potato peeler and using that, and just there is something really raw and genuine about it, I think. And I think that also comes through in the final design. It's a very honest thing. It's not trying to be super extravagant or gimmicky. It's just a really good potato peeler with a really big, comfortable grip. And I think, yeah, I would say that stuff like that does come through in at least stuff that I do at UIC, where it's just trying to be as simple and as pure of one idea as it can be, and not convoluted a bunch of ideas into one. And I think that is what makes something really good, is when it can be one thing the best it can be, in an interesting and new way. I think that, because like with Marty's bottle opener, a lot of bottle openers open bottles, but that one is there's a, like, it works really well, but also it's fun, and that's also another part that makes it new and genuine, is that it's fun and it adds something to it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, and we talk about like performance. Does the thing actually work? But also performance can just be the fun of using it, or the clarity of a design like this, just the attention to detail. It's still, it's so well thought out, but it does that as well, compared to other bottle openers that were out there before it. So. And it does also kind of represent the reason I chose it. I think it's part of a product designer that they're a little mischievous. They like to play with ideas. They want to like do things differently. There's always something new out there. And I think design is, part of it is about play, playing with ideas until you end up with something that hasn't been done before. And there's always going to be something new.
I think something that all the objects you chose have in common is kind of their clarity and singularity in a way. Song, I'm wondering if I could ask you to talk a little bit about how these principles that we've been talking about, as well as those that you outline in the book, how they transcend product design and impact different areas of design, like service design or systems design, or even outside of design.
Well, the discipline, I mean, we teach and we study product design, and that's sort of our core discipline. But I think a lot of these ideas can go beyond just making a physical product. I think the definition of the product itself has blurred quite a bit. So when we say, oh, it's a product design, or I do product design 20 years ago, probably you meant something slightly different than now. Even in a relatively traditionally set school like UIC, most of our graduate projects or undergrad, the final projects are not necessarily a traditional product design or mass manufactured industrial product. A lot of them are computer software. Some of them are not necessarily designed for large manufacturing, but rather kind of a design that expresses an idea rather than for utility. I think the principles that we try to articulate here kind of includes the larger sense of design. We talk about how to design softwares. We talk about how the natures of just product in general and the way that we have to kind of look at the whole system and not necessarily just the product itself as an episode. I think designers these days have a lot of people to satisfy, and a good design has to kind of cater to all of the stakeholders, not just the user or the manufacturer, but even the logistics people who are going to be moving your product from one place to another. It's all part of the design, and our concerns have kind of expanded in this myriad of complexity that is very difficult to deal with. So yeah, the discipline, the challenges, I think, became much greater. And I think we're gonna probably touch on this later in this conversation, but I think one of the big big shift to answer your question is that design's primary concern began with the kind of the physical concerns, but now we are more concerned with the humanity side of things. How to cater to and deal with people, not just users, but people who are involved in all aspects of this process. So yeah, the short answer is it just got really hard, I guess.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of nodding from all of our panelists. Emanuela and Spencer, as newer entrants into this field, do either of you have examples of work that you did while at UIC or at ID so far that sort of speak to this broadening scope of what a product is?
I think I can talk about one was last semester we had a project. It was in a class about research, and it was about opioid use at UIC. And we were going into it thinking, oh, the opioid crisis has to be hitting UIC really hard, and there has to be some way we can fix it. And what we came out with was that UIC might not necessarily have a huge opioid problem for whatever reasons, but that the education that UIC provides means UIC has education. We can give that education access to people who do have opioid problems outside of the UIC system. And so what we came up with was, rather than catering to the people inside UIC with opioid problems, we catered to drug rehabilitation centers with the education UIC can provide, so that the system of them like going through rehabilitation can also involve education, so that they don't have to go back to the same circumstances that they were in before. So I think that was one of my favorite projects too, was because there was this larger scope of, it wasn't just a physical product, but it was really changing and really helping people and not just like users of the thing, like Song was saying.
Oh, yeah, I can go. The project that came to mind was my final project in senior year at UIC. So I decided to design like a travel suit for really for mothers who were traveling with toddlers. And it was like an interesting project because at first, like I thought, okay, I'm only designing for the kid, but then there were other people that I had to consider. So it's not just the child, but like the major stakeholder is the mother. And then not just the mother, but even within the space of an airport, it had to like fit certain TSA guidelines and other things. So it really, I really learned a lot during that project, honestly. But it was fun.
Yeah, it definitely, once you start, in my own experience, once you start down the road of, oh, I'm just going to design XYZ, it very quickly expands to being many things to many different people. And I think one of the best and longest lasting lessons that I learned from Marty's class when I was in foundation is that as a designer, you have to resist the temptation to be all things to all people sometimes, because that is a surefire way to set yourself down the path of kind of a lack of clarity. So speaking of design school lessons, I'm going to ask Marty and Sung, as educators, do you have a favorite kind of design lesson or one that you return to again and again that you make sure to pass on to students?
Do you have a favorite one, Sung?
Wow. Well, I thought about this because I knew this question would come up, but it's kind of a difficult one. Well, in the book, I'm going to point to one of the lessons that I like, which is lesson 45. Products perform when not in use. And I could probably talk about it in regards to what we're talking about here, meaning, trying to do so much and having overly broad concerns that, as a designer, that you have to satisfy all people or all stakeholders, or all, in this case, all kind of state of utility or state of being for your product, which, maybe I'm unnecessarily making this complicated. The lesson says, and the kind of the take home from the lesson is that products are actually performing when it's not in utility, when it's not being used. So it kind of separates the concept of being used or being useful with kind of the function or the primary function to which the product was conceived. So when talking about a chair or credenza, any furniture is a good example of this. I'm sitting on a chair and it's certainly being used, but when it's not being used and it's just sitting in an interior space, it's still sort of being used as a visual piece or as a kind of a entity that defines the nature of the space. for example, or when it's being stacked up, it's exercising its function while not necessarily being useful to a human being directly. And so, yeah, back to this, idea of having this, I guess, problem of, should we design according to just, one clear point, or should we try to satisfy all aspects and, every, the complexity of problems. And, I'm of course back and forth, but yeah, to me, this idea kind of serves me as a interesting energy when I design. Back to the, the guitar that, I was showing, the Strat. It's such a clear example of it. It's such a clear piece of engineered product. It was designed with a very clear mindset of, oh, we're gonna try to amplify and make the sound of an instrument very large, electrically, not acoustically, and that was the whole point. But in trying to satisfy that, it actually tackled so many complexities of designing a piece of instrument, from the manufacturing side of things to logistics to the type of music that it created, to even, fashion and lifestyle. And so, yeah. So that's very interesting to me, how there's always a back and forth between making one product do one thing really well versus having to, have to deal with all of the complexities of the, product, the byproduct of, the design, or if it's unexpected effects.
What about you, Marty? Is there a lesson that really stands out to you that either you teach in class or that you really advocated for going in the book?
There's quite a few lessons that are there. I don't know. I would just build a little bit more on the one that Sung is talking about. And it's a little bit of, going farther with this, but going a little deeper in how the lesson was written. It just shows, like, when you design, it's always interesting when everyone's collaborating together. This particular lesson is started with, I think, something I said about a Steelcase project, about we were reinventing their storage business. And we came up with this model, which was called archive, anticipated, and active, which is the way people would use paper in the office. To put it in a file cabinet. It was archived, it was anticipated, it was sitting on their desk in a folder, or it was actually active, they're like writing on it or using Post-its or something. So Sung then reinterprets this and like uses the chair as an example of that, and does this beautiful, fantastic drawing showing these states of a product. And then the writing goes further into other, like, we had long conversations, the three of us, about this topic, and does it make sense? Does it have greater implications, or can we take it across different products? And then in the text, it starts to talk about, how, say, for example, a headphone, yes, you use it, but it has to, sometimes it's going to travel with you, or it's going to be put away somewhere. So what do? All those things are part of the design that that we want to take care of to make the best potential object. So,
and how would you guys say that a principle like that applies to something that's not an object? And Spencer or Emanuela, feel free to jump in here as well. I know the idea of having something in multiple states of use does feel very focused on objects at first, but I think that it does expand certainly into web design, and that's one thing that comes to mind immediately for me. Does anything come to mind for you all about how this principle or kind of general concept goes beyond just designing products that are physical and tangible?
Any comments? I think it leads to that another lesson, which is this idea of like an activity or a service concept as an example. You know, before you say experience something like going to the grocery store or anything like that, where it's a service experience, but you're involved with different products all the ways along, all the ways through. Everyone knows what that's like. It's like all those elements from before to the activity of grocery shopping to, say, for example, like when you get home, and everything in between, all the things that you might need to accomplish that. I don't know, all these things, they seem sometimes to overlap, which was part of the problem of writing it. Like to Sung, I think Sung also talked about this, that everything's kind of part of a system. And that's the greater complexity of that we face today. That, as Sung also said, like that people didn't necessarily want to face 20 years ago or 50 years ago. Or, you know, when we say design is for people, no, just for the consumer, or is it for the community? I mean, the differences between today and even 5 or 10 years ago and the kinds of projects that we want to tackle. We want to work on projects for the community. That's what, when we moved down to the main campus, that's what I wanted to do. Is so part of, that's what's so interesting about design, is that it reacts to the culture of today and the technology of today and the people of today. And that's why it's gonna always be here, and that's why it's always changing. And that's what, you know, makes it so exciting. And for people who want to face those challenges, it's a great, you know, challenge, basically a great problem to work on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that about design being kind of an evolving concept itself. And I know that certainly from my time at ID that there are as many different answers to what is design and what is great design as there are designers out there. We do have a question here that I think is applicable to this discussion, kind of talking about designing services versus designing products. What are some of the challenges or differences in each? And I'll throw that out to anyone. Except for Marty. I'm gonna reel you in, Marty.
That's fine. I was not, yeah, Spencer's turn. Or Emanuela's.
Was the question the difference between service and product?
Yeah, the difference in the process of designing a service versus a product. And do you go through the same process, or are there concerns weighted differently, I think?
I think just generally speaking, in order to output a good product, you have of course, you have to deal with, you know, the people and the stakeholders, but, you know, the knowledge in the technical aspect of the product becomes, you know, foundational. So, so I think if I were to weigh the difference between, let's say, the, you know, the physical, technical development of the product to understanding people or human beings or community, I think it's still important, but you know, you can still output a good product with a, you know, with a keen knowledge of technical aspect of it. I think service is really much deeper rooted in understanding people and their behavior, community, you know, tendencies and things like that. And so, yeah, I think as a designer, you know, your attention has to be slightly more weighted to looking at people than, you know, than the product itself. For example, if you're gonna, you know, design a really nice scissor, right? You have to understand the context, but you have to understand the material, the type of, you know, type of the metal or type of, you know, the manufacturing process. That is not a simple process. And yeah, and probably you will have to deal with the manufacturer that's overseas, you know, and the logistics and et cetera. Whereas the service, I think, is a little bit, you know, possibly more flexible in you know, offering the solution, depending on what service we're talking about. But
yeah, I'm going to ask Emanuela, is that kind of consistent with your experience as you've come into ID? I know that the transition from UIC to ID is probably, you've kind of had both sides of it now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll just touch on that briefly. Yeah, so like at UIC, it was purely product, but then coming to ID, I noticed that there was a drastic shift, whereas like it's more of design strategy and sort of thinking about systems and how things work. So I do have a similar experience where it's like when you're designing for services, it's really dependent on people. I've been on a few projects related to service design, and like working on them, we have to really think about who our target audience is and making sure that we're trying to meet whatever need that they have. Whereas with product design, it was like, okay, we're looking at manufacturing and we're testing like the tactility of a product. But then with service, it's like, no, you really have to design with that customer. It's not like, yeah, you really have to design with that customer.
Thanks for sharing that. So I'm going to pivot the conversation just a little bit so that we can hear a little bit more from Marty and Sung about the process of two designers getting together to write a book. And I'm curious if you could share any insight on how the writing process mirrored or did not mirror the design process.
oh, Marty.
Sung is going to start this conversation. We also came prepared with this conversation too.
I know this is like a hot potato question.
But we have some, it was very interesting. I'll let Sung start then.
Okay.
How did this whole thing start, Sung?
So we received kind of a request to sort of send a proposal, not a proposal, a request to kind of audition, basically, with a sample, if you know, if we want to be considered as a potential writer of this book. The 101 Things I Learned series is something that Marty and I were familiar with and really were keen on, especially the architecture book. That's probably the most known edition of the book. And so, yeah, we were contacted by Matt Frederick, and who is the sort of owner of the franchise, and sort of the project master of this series. And so we horribly naively thought that, oh, it's such a simple book, can't be so hard to write. And so we sort of wrote up a handful of potential lessons and, sent it over. After a few back and forth, I think we were chosen to write the book. But there was, honestly, it was a very difficult task for me. I'm not a writer by nature. And so it was very difficult to kind of distill the idea into that chewable nugget, in that right size and shape to be put on a book as a lesson. So basically the process was a little bit chaotic for me, as in we just made that great expansion of ideas and options in hopes to kind of come to some sort of point. But that was difficult because we had to kind of come up with 101 lessons. And so yeah, it was a constant like expansion and kind of tweaking of these ideas and trying to fit one next to another. Or oftentimes we would think about an idea and realize that it was actually 3 different lessons that we were just jumbling up together. So it was kind of a process to divide the lessons into the right kind of chunks, and that took a very long time. Yeah. And a lot of conversations. Yeah,
many conversations. So there's so many lessons in just writing a book that we could talk about too. It was around a 2-year process. And when Sung and I started, we were very, I think, very gung-ho, we're just gonna, I'm a consultant, I kind of always just like, okay, this is a nice project, we're gonna get this thing done. Like Sung and I will sit down and start writing all these lessons and doing these drawings, and wouldn't this make a nice lesson, and had lots of ideas, but it really was a struggle. I would agree. Sung and I had never written a book before, so this is the first time we ever wrote anything of this length, and it was a collaboration, and everybody worked on it together. And the process was not like something I was familiar with. The process that I'm familiar with is a design process as a consultant, where there's a research stage, there's an ideation stage, there's here's the concepts, out the door it goes, and you make progress. And you go through these stages. And we went through stages, but like we had a huge matrix. Oh, what are we going to include? I think we had like 150 things, from ergonomics to sustainability to all kinds of the technical issues of design. So we were, we were definitive that way, but that only got us so far. And then once we finally found things that I think we were all very competitive, and we were like always pushing to get to the best end result. So, so we pushed very hard. And what was interesting also is that, Matt, who's the author of the series, he's done quite a few books now. And, we have lots of conversations about all the differences between all the design disciplines, from architecture to communication design to product to UI, UX. But in the end, there's a kind of flow that goes through the book. And that's kind of like, as Sung and I, we both, well, he's the real musician. I just kind of do a little bit, but there is ultimately what started to happen, because the process was much more open-ended than a typical product design program. There was kind of a melody that went through, I would say, the book, which was kind of delightful in the end. But I think that was very unexpected, the way things came together, and it was kind of like, oh, this lesson should follow this lesson. It started to sort itself out, but also there was a lot of skill in doing that, I think. And like
also talking about or juxtaposing this to process of design, I think the understanding of the user, in this case reader, was a little bit undermined in the beginning for me. And it took me a while to kind of get a clearer idea of who's going to read this, or who we're writing for. And it's the question that came up many times, but it took a long time to long time for me to put that into use. For example, there are lots of very important design lessons as a designer that we left out, particularly because, for the readers who might not have a clear idea on what product design is even, then talking about a little bit more advanced ideas may be not fitting to this, the intent of the book. And so things like the idea of how might we, which is pivotal in design education in both schools, things like that were left out. And so, and also we kind of interpreted ideas or the important kind of vocabulary, we distilled it to a little bit more understandable lay person's terminology, so that it doesn't read as so esoteric, so it's just just everyday language to the intent of the book. And that was actually something that, looking back, it's obvious, but from someone who's very used to the the lingo, it was also like a fun experience to just like, oh, how would you explain this to a middle school person, high school, or someone who has never even understood or never thought of these things. The title of the book even, I believe that the industrial design is a little bit more commonly accepted term, although they're interchangeable within the industry of of design. but we decided to go with a product design because it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit easier to understand. If you really think about the idea of industrial design. And I remember looking back, like, industrial design, do you like design the industry, or do you design factories, you know, versus a product design? And so, you know, the suggestion of the word itself, we had to kind of reevaluate, you know, very novice's kind of, you know, perspective. Another thing to share is in terms of difference and similarities between writing and doing design is, for me, I feel like doing design is the process of removing, you know, the unnecessary material to get, you know, to only leave the, you know, what's important, the essence of, you know, of the concern. So I always want to subtract in order to get to the solution, so that the solution is a kind of one pure nugget. And McKinley, you know, I connected with you when you kind of articulated that all of our favorite product is actually that one product that does one thing really well. But we couldn't do that in this book because it had to be kind of a collection of all of these, you know, simple but worthy ideas. And I don't know if there is like one point that I can, you know, I can define this entire book through. You know, it's a collection of varieties of ideas, and they are all connected to one another. And some of them are similar, but, you know, even the further ones, if you go around the corner, it's all connected. But yeah, but I'm not sure if I can so I can define this in a short, you know, idea or phrase. And so for me, it wasn't, you know, just sifting, you know, through materials to get to one point, but rather kind of like embracing a lot of ideas to kind of serve a platter of sample food. You know, what do you call it? The flag of beer. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you and Marty reflect on the process of writing the book, because I think while it's very different than design, it also really echoes, I think, what an early student experience of design is, where you're just kind of adrift, one might say. I might say, coming in from a liberal arts background and not knowing how to cut foam core. So I want to give the students here a chance to speak a little bit. Emanuela and Spencer, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to enter into design, and maybe focus a little bit on your most memorable moment of your design education so far?
I would say I have two. I think one that I think every designer says they is the worst thing, but secretly really loves, is those late nights where you are just dead tired in the studio, just wanting to break down, but you kind of live for those moments. You live for those moments, and they're like the greatest things. But then also seeing your design make it outside of, at least for a student, outside of the walls of the design school. Last year we had a architecture firm come work with UIC, and they wanted some birdhouses built to go on the river walk. And so we designed those, and a few of the students got picked, and I was one of them. And I was like, this is was a great moment, like getting to like take my mom and dad and show them this thing that like isn't just in this all white building where it's like there's a podium and it's on. It's like out and there are people looking at it. There's grass and trees all around it, and it's this real thing in the real world, and it's much more than just a student project at that point in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely resonates with me as well. Last year, I had the opportunity to work on a communication design project with a doctor down at the University of Chicago. And we had done a lot of research on what wound up being a decision-making support tool for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. And so we'd done a lot of user research and interviews, like Sung and Marty were saying, really trying to understand the human problem. And we did a lot of late nights and a lot of whiteboard work and a lot of Post-it notes. And, you know, I think as a designer, you're always just a little bit dissatisfied with what you wind up producing, that end deliverable. But when we handed it off to the client, to our wonderful partner at the University of Chicago, she wound up sharing it with some of the people that we had interviewed. And she told us a story that one of them had broken down crying and said, I wish I had this. I wish I'd had this workbook when I was going through this with my mom who was ill. And so the impact of these things that we do, even just at a school level, can be really meaningful. And it's very rewarding for that feedback to reach you.
Yeah, I think that dissatisfaction is something that like a lot of students feel, but then there is something about somebody else who's outside of like the design school being like, this is great, like I love this, being like, you're like, oh wait, maybe it is actually like good and I'm just being really hard on myself.
Yeah. Emanuela, what about you?
My experience with design school may be drastically different from a lot of people. So I came across design for the first time through an encyclopedia. And I should already tell you something, like it wasn't through a computer. So I remember when I came to UIC and I took a few classes, and I remember my first class I can't remember the exact name of the class at UIC, but it was with Alice. And I had asked her, what is Photoshop? She laughed and I laughed too. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, this is actually funny. But it was a huge learning curve for me. Design, so before I came to the US, I was an artist and everything in my world revolved around art. But when I came into design, it was drastically different because it was more focused on how the user would respond to it. So I remember going through like crit classes and it being like a very scary and uncomfortable place to be in, because it's like you have this work that you put in so much time and then someone tells you, hey, I don't think that's working. You need to change that. No, don't do that. And it was really hard at first, but it took me a while to really understand how valuable critiques were. They weren't like supposed to be harmful in any way, but they were meant to actually help you learn as you went. So after I graduated from UIC, I worked with like different people from different backgrounds. And I remember like saying, oh, like, no, don't do that. That looks terrible. Or, why are you using those kind of colors? And some people like feeling like, oh, I was like attacking them rather than, oh, like, I'm just, trying to help you with your idea or your concept. So that was definitely something I learned. And you never really get to that point in design where you say you're finally like a star designer. Like, oh, I've absolutely become like the 100% like product designer or the best I can be. It's like you're growing every single day. So for me, that was my experience in design school. It was fun.
Thank you for sharing that. So I do want to shift to taking some questions from the audience. We've had a great audience. Thank you guys for submitting so many amazing questions. So we are not going to be able to get to them all, unfortunately. But I want to start with this one. Someone wrote in and asked, what are the criteria or features that determine a quote unquote good product? And that could be a non-physical product as well. Who wants to take a stab at that?
Some you want to go for it? I always put
everyone. Yeah, I mean that's the question, isn't it? Yeah. I think there are lots of good answers to this, and I'll just say one. I'll just mention like one angle. I'm not gonna, I can't say this is the definitive answer to this, but a good product is a product that answers the question of the time that we're in, or the time that it was designed for. I think a good product answers the need of the people of that time, and possibly even define that time years past. So a good product will kind of exhibit the nature of the time it was designed, both from the product and the designer's point of view, but it tells a lot about the people who lived at that time. Every so often we come across that kind of product, and I think it's a really it's awesome. So, and that naturally asks me the second question: what is the time? How are we going to be defined years past, and what are the product that defines our time accurately and holistically?
Yeah, well, I think one category of product that has become extremely relevant to our time are obviously software products. So I'm curious about, all the iPhones, hardware and software. So we do have another question here. What is a common thread through all great design, whether it's software design or graphic design or product design, that really, I think, that really makes it stand out and gives it, can help give it some longevity?
not an easy question.
No, they brought me in as moderator to ask the really hard question. Emanuela, did you have something to say to that?
Okay, I'm gonna look at it from a UI UX standpoint. I think what really creates a long-lasting product is a product, or let's say it's an app that's able to adapt to the changes that are happening. Honestly, because what we're facing today is drastically different from what we may face tomorrow. So it is essential that whatever system or like product that we're designing, we have to keep the idea of like this thing would evolve, it would change. Today, it may look like this, tomorrow, it may look like something else, and being comfortable with that sort of change.
I'm gonna mention maybe one like hopeful. It may not be the right answer, but it's something that I'm always hoping design get design that that succeeds in hanging around, being relevant for a long time, is the kind of design that makes the user helps them become what they ultimately want to be, rather than to granting them a kind of a instant and temporary gratitude or pleasure. something that makes them a better person, something that makes them a, you know, the kind of something that develops them into, you know, the kind of the person that, you know, they want to be. So I don't know if it has to do with ethics. You know, the reason that, you know, there are so many products that, you know, go in and out and that live for a very short time is because, to me, is this, you know, it's like, oh, it's so clever, it's so, you know, fun, or it's so stimulating, it's interesting. But then that kind of dies out because you soon realize that, oh, the more you use this, you know, you kind of start realizing the downside of it, and you kind of hesitate to, you know, continue. And I think, yeah,
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting that both you and Emanuela identified basically the concept of growth, but from two different directions. One, the product growing and evolving, and the other, the user or the human growing and evolving. So I want to take our next question here from the audience. Someone out there is curious about a software product that the panel loves and why it works.
software product.
Well, I have one.
Thinking
The software that I've been using that I actually like, and I guess it does relate to this issue of products. Like so many products today are like both hardware and software. Screens, Sung showed his iPhone, which of course is this a good product? It made the #1 in the 100 most important products. I think that's still a debatable question, whether it's a good product or not. So certainly held up as a good product. But I think that the dilemma that we're kind of in, or the moment we're in, is that we have to, as designers, deal with the larger issues of all these products that are going into the world. But as far as the software, let's get back to software for a second. I love Adobe Scan. I just love it. Mostly because it's like, it just works the way I want it to. It just like finds the edge of the paper, you know, you just point it, it's got the little dots. It finds it's also crossing the boundaries between like this digital and physical divide. And it helps me do that. So I use it all the time now since we're all remote, and I'll scan sketches and put them on Miro, and it does all those things really easily and the way I would expect them to be done. So yeah, it's just super easy to use. I can't stop talking about it because often I see, you know, there's so many times I use software that it's like, who did they design this for? Like, it doesn't work for me. Like even Zoom sometimes is not doing the things I want it to. So anyway, probably other people have examples.
Oh, I think that's a great example. Spencer, were you going to jump in?
Oh yeah, for me, a software that I just love is Fusion 360. We started using some other softwares, but like the servers went down, and so we had to transition to using Fusion 360, and it just instantly clicked way faster for me. And I think Fusion 360 speaks to an ease of use and taking down kind of like a gatekeeping in a way where like you can teach yourself it so much easier than any other CAD software, I think. And I think there's just something where like you can just learn how to use it and become really powerful in it and use it like how you want to use it and not how the software wants you to use it. And so I think there's something like that. And I think also another like Autodesk thing is Autodesk has a CAD software for kids called Tinkercad, and it just uses primitive forms. And that's like the thing that I started using like in high school before like my school got a 3D printer and I was the only one who was willing to like figure out how to use it. And I got Tinkercad and I started using it, and it was like, it just is really easy and allows people to get into this world that is very like, has like a lot of gatekeeping and stuff that I think it's kind of breaking down those barriers and allowing more people to figure out how to be designers, makers, whatever they want to be in this world.
Yeah, my son uses a thing called Scratch. It's a coding software for kids. And yeah, it's amazing how it's what he does there just by trial and error. I mean, he doesn't, sit through and, go through all the instructions. He just tries this and, tries that and kind of understands the rules.
Yes, what I'm hearing is software that lets you use it rather than feeling like it's the other way around, which I think is a great principle. All right, so I think we have time for one or two more questions from the audience here. I'm curious about this one. This person says, what emerging ideas or technologies do you think are most important for designers to invest in understanding moving forward, I guess, looking towards the future?
I think digital workspaces, especially as a student, this ability to connect and work with people just everywhere and not having to necessarily be with them really allows you to, it just allows you to be able to like do stuff on your own time in a way that like is really helpful, especially because design can be very consuming and not always while you're like at like the studio, you're going to be like cranking things out. So like being able to be like, oh, I have an idea, I'll just share this with everyone right now is really important and helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely been huge going remote. I have to say the first thing that sprang to mind for me is not so much a technology or piece of software here, but I think it's going to be really important for designers to invest in the ongoing conversation around anti-racism and anti-oppression and how that plays into design. And that's a conversation we're having at ID and that a lot of designers are having. But I think that learning how to talk about those concepts and not just concepts, but people's real lived experiences is going to be really crucial for the field moving forward. And I don't know that that fits into the technology bucket, but I did just want to make a plug there for that as well.
Yeah, I would second that and bring us to one of the lessons. The ultimate skill isn't a design skill; it's skill of understanding. It's one of the last ones, and I think technology is important, and all the technical aspects of learning how to design absolutely important, but we are pretty sensitive to that. It's something that we talk about all the time, but we do not talk about stuff like classical sensibility, for example. When you look, classical visual sensibility, for example, what is a good form? We don't really talk about that, or how to understand people. I think it's those, it's probably the stuff that we're not talking about so much that is going to be, under the shadow.
Yeah. Marty, we have a question just for you here. I know you're thrilled. How does learning to play a musical instrument make you a better product designer? I'm guessing whoever asked this is one of your former students.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know where that's come from. Yeah, that is the one of my favorite stories. So not everybody knows that I played accordion as a child, and when I started teaching in 2008, people like, well, McKinley came later, but so many people from different areas, they were just changing their lives. They were coming into design from non-design fields, and they were like trying to learn something completely new. They had no idea, a whole new language, everything, whole new studio environment, everything. So I kind of wanted to feel that because, I don't know, that just really intrigued me. And we talked about this also, like how important kind of a beginner's mind is in the field of design, like starting just asking why all the time. But, and just learning skills, like we've been talking a lot about design skills too. Those are not so hard, not so easy, I should say. But I mean, I just think it gives you an appreciation for starting with something simple. Like I started learning from other people. I mean, there's so many things that are parallel with design. You can sit there and sketch by yourself, or you can play with other designers or other musicians. There's so many interesting things about learning to play the instruments themselves, as Sung pointed out, like we're just enamored by musical instruments that are just there that, I don't know, amazing objects, I think. So I think it's just that also when you're starting out and studying design, when you just start, when we start in foundation, students who never designed a product in their lives can do good products. Like just the way you can play a simple song beautifully after, you know, a month of practice. But you can also just do this forever. You can study, you can practice design, you can play music forever. There's so many parallels, which makes it super fascinating for me. But it takes a lot of work, and the student has to do it. The musician has to do it. We all have to do the work, which to Spencer's point is we talked about this, like you have to do it to the level that it's gonna stretch yourself. Like that's a really interesting part of it. You're just not gonna do a simple object, even at the most basic, like what else am I gonna do? Like it's always a challenge. And I think that's a parallel with music and product design or any kind of design. So that's why I find it super fun. So.
Well, I can vouch that the accordion concerts are also quite fun to witness. For any aspiring ID students out there, that's a real draw. So we have time for just one more quick question before we wrap up, and I'm going to make it a rapid fire round for everyone to answer here. We'll start with Spencer. What is one design rule that you love to break?
Oh gosh.
One question.
Oh gosh. I feel like one is that a lot of people will be like, don't make it like just a simple like primitive shape, but I feel like primitive shapes, there's something really nice and simple and good about them that makes them really stand out and like be memorable things, even though they are just like a box or like a sphere or something, but there's something really powerful about them. And that's why they are so important in every object.
Nice. Emanuela, what about you?
Give you me time to think about this question.
All right, I'll go to Song then.
The design
Song's gonna
rule.
answer it.
Well, I would say the common design rule of design according to the user needs. Just do whatever you want as a designer, which I do sometimes. Makes things much more fun. Might not work, but I like to do that. Just do what's cool. I don't know. That's so against the rule.
That's a good rule to break.
Yeah, just do cool things.
Marty, do you have one?
No. You know, my other rule is like, just because somebody asks you a question, you don't have to answer it.
All right, you can be excused this one time.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's hard. That's a really interesting. I have to think about that.
It's a good question. I think that I've been thinking about it too. It's like a cardinal rule of comm design. Use all caps, and I am so guilty of loving an all caps title. And I think it can work in the right typeface. I feel like I'm about to hear or get an email from Tomoko if she's listening, one of our great comm design professors at ID. But that is definitely one of my guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
Emanuela, do you have one?
Okay, there's one. No. Jeez, this is hard. I know there's one thing that I find myself doing, and that is making my sketches look perfect, whereas it's not meant to be perfect. It's meant to be low res.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That is a good one. Oh yeah, I sketch in pencil too sometimes. I know it's really bad, but otherwise there's so much pressure that I don't sketch at all. So I know. All right. Got an OMG in the comments to sketching in pencil. Well, I think that's a great note to end our conversation. I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists, to ID, to UIC as well. It's been a fun evening. Thank you to our audience who submitted such great questions. And just a quick plug for 2 upcoming events. We have another discussion in the exploreID series on civic design next week. That's going to be next Wednesday, November 18th at 6 p.m. Central Time. And we'll have some alumni who are talking about how they apply design in the civic sector. And then Marty, I believe you're part of an event in December with the Design Museum of Chicago and the IIT College of Architecture. And let me see if I got this name right. Is that the Chicagoland, a Laboratory for 20th Century Innovation event?
Could be.
Could be. All right.
Too far away. I haven't even thought about it. So.
Yep, and that's on December 10th. It looks like. Yes, I have some third-party verification in the chat. All right, well, thank you all so much. This was a lot of fun, and everyone have a great night. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, McKinley, for moderating, and everybody here, Manuela and Spencer and Sung and everybody out there in Zoom land. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen, also for organizing everything.
Yes, big thank you to Krista and Kristen.
And Krista, yeah. Cool.
All right.
Everybody,
Take care, everyone. Good night.
be well.